All right, everybody sit down and shut up, for God's sakes. I've been given permission to treat you all as hostile witnesses. Just basically because, we should have the same turnout at Ottawa JavaScript. So you should all come second Wednesday of every month, Ottawa JavaScript. If you want to give a talk, that would be awesome. In case you didn't notice, I'm one of the co-organizers. I work for Adobe. I just put that little Adobe thing there so I could justify spending half the day down here with y'all. So my marketing team is happy. But my name, it's Simon MacDonald. You can get a hold of me at Twitter at MacDonaldST. And in case you ever need to ask any questions after the fact, that's the best way to get a hold of me. And generally, any social network ever, that's going to be my crappy Unix user ID from way back in the day. Mike, you know me so well. Thank you, Mike. So in case you didn't notice, this is what I'm currently trying to do here is a little bit of infinite Simons. So since just before ForwardJS Ottawa last year, I started getting people to take presentations of myself at this slide. And so this is actually from JazzCon, which it's actually Mike's picture from a couple of weeks ago. And inside there, Confu Montreal. Inside there, there's a thing from Toronto. Inside, and it just goes all the way down. So it's great. Anyway, I'm a narcissist. I could talk about myself all day, but apparently I only got a half an hour for this 45-minute long presentation. Mary, wherever you are, I'm sorry that I'm going to go long. I'm so sorry. I'm not actually sorry. All right, so what are we here to talk about today? Well, progressive web apps. Anybody here actually build a progressive web app? Yeah, Mike, again, you don't count. Oh, sweet, there's 2 people. That's great, and unfortunately, one of them is Mike. All right, so what is a progressive web app? Well, it's a way of taking modern web capabilities and delivering an app-like user experience. It's like, all right, cool, that makes sense, that's good. They evolved from web pages and browser tabs to become this immersive experience, giving you a low friction at every point of the way. So it makes it very easy for them to get installed. So, I guess what I'm saying is they're just web pages? Yeah, they're just web pages. So the one takeaway that I want you to get from this talk, and then maybe I can end early, is progressive web apps are just web pages. They're not really that special. You shouldn't be afraid of them. There's a lot of hype behind them right now. Google is pushing them hard. Apple is starting to add a lot of functionality to Safari and to iOS, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But it's just web technologies. It's just the web. You just, you can progressively add it to your site. So, start taking a look at it. It's not as hard as you may think. All right, so what are progressive web apps? Well, there's a number of things that kind of indicate whether an app is progressive or not. And first and foremost is it should work in every browser, no matter what type of browser it is. If your favorite browser isn't in with those icons there, I'm sorry, I just got tired after 5. I'm really a lazy person. It makes me a good developer. So anyway, that may seem weird because not all browsers implement all parts of the progressive web apps suite of APIs. But that's OK, because the key point is it's progressive. If the capability is there, your application should take advantage of it. If the capability is not there, then your application should act like a normal web page. And just kind of keep that in mind when you're building one. It should be responsive. So I am very bad at doing UI design and CSS. And when I had to grok responsive web design, there was this really great book from a book apart. Ethan Marcotte wrote it. It's called Responsive Web Design. I know, crazy, right? I think it was the best $9 US I ever spent. So if you're needing to learn more about that, I think that's an excellent resource. And it's linked to at the end of my presentation. So anyway, it shouldn't matter if it's a desktop app, if it's a mobile app, or we're going into the future, your application could be running on something like Google Home or Amazon's Alexa, like we just heard in the previous presentation, which was awesome, by the way. Thanks, we need to talk more. So you shouldn't really worry about what the form factor of it is. It should just work anywhere. It should be connectivity independent. It shouldn't matter if you have just a wonderful Wi-Fi that Adobe has provided for you today. No, you don't have to clap. It's OK. Or it's free. What do I care, right? Let's go for it. Or if you have a crappy 2G connection, or you have no connectivity whatsoever, you have to build your app in such a way that it should take advantage of the capabilities that are available to it at the time. And progressive web apps being enhanced with service workers, they have some cool new capabilities that you can use. And then, of course, it should be app-like. It should kind of feel like an application. And there's this thing, it's called the app shell model right now. And so what we have here is we have the kind of the shell of the application. We have our title, we have our hamburger menu, we have all of the things that won't change that often with your application. And these are the things that you can cache so that the next time your app starts, it'll start faster. And then the things that you want to get live is the content. So these are the things that you're going to be going out and requesting it from the network all the time. So when you think about architecting your application, you kind of want to take that in mind, is like splitting up the application shell from the actual content that's going to change a lot. And because I'm Canadian, I had to get like hockey skates in there somewhere. And if you want to completely derail me, we can start talking about hockey right now. Anyone? No? Okay, fine. It should be safe. If any, okay, I promised myself I wouldn't HTTP shame people, but I'm going to do it anyway. If your website is running on HTTP right now, shame on you. There is no reason for you to be doing that right now. Take a few minutes, go to Let's Encrypt, get a TLS for your website, make it HTTPS. You want to secure things for your users. You might think like, just my website of cat pictures, it shouldn't matter. It does matter. Just make it happen, okay? So I'm done shaming you now. But now let me give you an even better reason for doing this. If you're not providing your website over HTTPS, you're going to lose out on a lot of browser APIs. So back in the day, the geolocation API was available over HTTP. And so there is a lot of websites out there right now that you go to and like, oh, here's how you use geolocation API. And because they haven't been updated in years, they don't work because it'll only be available over HTTPS right now. And so things like push notifications, things like service workers, all of these things are only available over HTTPS and the new WebShare API. So for God's sakes, just go get HTTPS. They should be re-engageable. So this one, I'm a little dicey with because a lot of people think re-engageable happens to be push notifications. So if you think your website should request and show push notifications, you're wrong. I'm sorry, I'm just going to tell you this flat out. You're totally wrong. Don't do this to your users. It's a horrible idea. When your manager asks you to do it, try to stand up to him because it's wrong. You do not want to do this. Push notifications are pretty horrible on the web right now. So with the new web push API, it's kind of split into two things. One is the web push side of things, and the other one is the notification API. And what we see up here is the notification API. That's a really annoying thing that keeps on popping up. And that's the thing that you like go onto a website and you don't even get the content loaded. And already there's a dialog box popping up and says, hey, we'd like to send you push notifications. It's like, why would I say yes to this? I haven't even gotten to your website yet. I don't know what value you're going to provide to me. Why would I say yes? So please, please, please don't do that to your users. So if you absolutely, absolutely, absolutely have to provide push notifications because your boss is forcing you to, make sure that the users get a chance to take a look at your site, see what value it provides before you pop up that annoying dialogue. So again, I just feel like I'm shaming everybody here. Geez, I don't know if I had enough coffee. Maybe too much coffee. Anyway, the other part of web push is the ability to send messages from your server down to your website running on different people's browsers. That you should take advantage of because that doesn't necessarily mean you have to pop up an annoying dialogue. You can send messages to your website to say, oh, hey, there's some updates. Maybe you should go download those in the background. And that way you can provide a better user experience because things will run faster, but you won't annoy them with these annoying dialogues. All right, it should be installable. So we're moving into a point right now where the App Store, both on Android and Google, are just like filled with applications. And it becomes very difficult for your application to stand out. And in fact, right now, Apple is going to town on its terms of service and trying to call a lot of apps out of the App Store. So with progressive web applications, you can skip the entire App Store and basically have your users install these your websites onto their devices. So what we have here is we've gone to this test PWA that I have in the browser, and then what happens is after we've used it a few times, Chrome will actually pop up this dialog to say like, oh hey, you've been here a few times, you like this website, would you like to add it to your home screen? And if they do, and start it from the home screen icon that we have here, we just have what looks like a normal application. You notice in this case the Chrome URL bar is completely gone, and that's something that's controllable from the web app manifest. So I don't have the stats in front of me right now, but there was a good report from ComScore that basically tells you from the time that 1,000 users hear about your application to the time they actually start it, you're down to 243. So that's pretty crazy. So each step of that path is going to lose you 20% of your users. So by being able to have these things on the web, it's going to make it much easier for you to get to your users. All right. And one of the ways it'll be easier to get to users is it's completely linkable. So you're just sharing URLs around to people in order to kind of get people onto your web app. And that way you can really turn users into marketers for you. And of course, it doesn't require any complex steps where I have to accept 18 million different permissions and wait for it to download. It's nope, it just happens right away. And then, excuse me, it should be discoverable. So when it comes to progressive web applications, the way that they're discoverable is this thing called the web app manifest. So if you add a link in your main HTML page to a web app manifest, a lot of the crawlers out there, Google, Microsoft, et cetera, will be able to figure that out and basically bump you up in their search engine optimization as a web application. And in case of Microsoft, right now the Windows App Store is crawling the web for progressive web apps. And if they see you, they will add you to the Windows App Store automatically. You don't even have to submit it to it. So that's kind of interesting. Maybe they're doing that because they don't have as many apps as other app stores, but still, I think it's pretty cool. So all of this starts with manifest.json. So all of the capabilities for progressive web apps really can start here. So you don't even have to get into anything like service workers. You just really need one JSON file to start off with. Yeah, and of course, there's all of these water bottles around here that are just tempting me to drink from them, but I didn't bring them up here, so maybe not. Usually my daughter brings home the sickness, but maybe this time I will. All right. Anyway, this is an example of manifest.json. So this is what makes something a progressive web app, or at least gets you on that path. There's really not that much to it, and let's just quickly go through some of these things. So first and foremost, there's the short name, and that's basically the value that you're going to see when you do the add to home screen of your web application. So generally, you want to have that somewhere in the 8 to 12 character range, so it doesn't kind of spill off the screen. And then we have the long name, and this is what you can use in the application store. This is also what you can use here in the add to home screen dialog. Thanks, man. You're welcome. Teamwork. So yes, you can specify a different name from the short name, and because I'm an idiot, I actually didn't do that in this example, but you can have a much longer name here as well. And then of course we have the start URL. So when a user comes into your web application, they're going to hit whatever web page that you have. But when you're starting it from the desktop, it's okay, how does the browser know where to go? Well, it's going to pull this from the start page. So in this case, we're going to index.html. So you don't actually have to have the main web page of your progressive web app be the same as what it is on the web. You could make this PWA.html. You could do whatever you want if you wanted to have a slightly different experience. The other thing, for folks that are into analytics, one of the ways that you can detect whether or not your app is being loaded from the web or being loaded from the desktop is by doing a media query. And if the media query standalone is true, then we know that the user has started it from the desktop. So that's a good way of kind of figuring out if users are actually using your progressive web app. And if you spend time doing this, it's probably something that your boss is going to want to know as well. All right. And then we have the display type. So there's a number of display types. Standalone is the one that removes all of the browser Chrome. So it completely gets rid of the URL bar, any of the back buttons, any of the home buttons, any fun stuff like that. There's also a number of other ones. Full screen, which is what you would use for a video game, because that even removes the status bar from the top of your phone. There's browser, which makes it look exactly like a browser, which seems kind of weird to have that in a PWA. And then there's also a minimal UI, which gets rid of some of the bits of the browser, but not all of it. It still leaves you back and forward buttons. And that's kind of useful for something. If you're not providing any kind of navigation in your progressive web app, that may be something that you want to use. All right, so that's what a standalone one looks like. All right, Our background color, in this case, what the background color is used is when Chrome decides to create a splash screen for you when you launch the application from the home screen. It will create a splash screen using the background color and the icon and the name of your application for you. So you don't have to do anything in order for the splash screen to show up. It'll just do that for you. What I suggest is that you set the background color to be whatever the main color of your application is. So I don't know how many people have run into this when you're loading a website, and of course your browser starts with a blank white screen, and then all of a sudden the rest of the content loads and it flashes black because the main color of your application is black at that point. So what you could do here is have the splash screen match the main color of your application so it's less jarring to your users, so it's kind of a smoother experience. And then we have the theme color. So that allows you to match the color of the browser bar to the main theme of your application. So that's pretty well supported in Chrome and in Firefox. And then we get into some icons. So there's a number of icons that you can have. Of course, one of the icons is going to be used during the splash screen process in order to show you that. And another one is going to be used in the add to home screen side of things. And finally, I actually don't have an example, but when you add the application to your home screen, you can use another icon there. So as of the last time I checked, kind of the bare minimum for you would be to have a 192 by 192 and a 512 by 512 icon. So you can provide this giant array of icons in order to work on all the different kinds of device sizes and resolutions. But at a bare minimum, these are the two ones that I would suggest right off the bat. So how are we doing on time? Oh yeah, I gotta fly. All right, then of course we have the application shell architecture, which I talked about a little bit earlier. In this case, I've stolen this completely from Google, but it kind of gives you an idea of things that you'd want to cache, and that is the application shell. So that's like our menus, our title bars, all that stuff, and the content is what you want to load dynamically. All right, and so when you're getting into building a progressive web app, there's a lot of front-end tools that you can use to do this. And if your favorite front-end tool is not here, and I know Mike listed a lot of them earlier today, it's not because I forgot to add it. It's just because I really didn't like it, and I think you're wrong for using it. That's not true. Again, it was the 5-thing rule. I just got lazy after that. So there's a number of different things that you can use for doing progressive web apps. I put Preact in the middle there because if you're doing any kind of React development right now, if you can take Preact and the Preact React compat library, which matches the React API, you're basically taking 4 kilobytes for that entire framework. So when you're looking at loading things quickly over the network and quickly parsing of the JavaScript side of things, Preact is particularly amazing for that. So that was kind of one of the ones I would recommend. So let's talk about caching and service workers. So what is a service worker? Basically, it's a script that runs in the background of your web browser, and it's completely separate from the web page. So you may already know that when you load up your site in a web browser, it has one and only one thread for running JavaScript. So everything happens on that main thread. No longer. We now have web workers and service workers, which are basically background threads that we can communicate between our main UI thread and the service worker. So when we want to add a service worker to our application, we just do something like this. First thing we want to do is to check if service worker is supported by our browser. If it's not, wow, am I done already? Dang. Anyway, sorry. You want to check to see that service worker is there. If it's not, we don't enhance our website with it. We just go on business as usual. But if it is, we wait for the main web, wait for the load event to happen, and then we just register our service worker, which is contained in the service worker.js file in this case. And then going into the service worker itself, basically what we're doing is adding up a bunch of event listeners. First and foremost is you want to have the install event listener. So the first time the service worker is registered, it'll fire off this install event, and this is where you want to set up any of your caches. So in this case, we have a cache version 1. We're caching the HTML, the CSS, and JavaScript, basically the main application shell for our app. And then we go on to the next event, which is activate. And in that point, that's a really good place to clean up any old caches you have. So what I have here is now I have this cache whitelist of v2. And basically what I'm saying is like, I want to keep the v2 cache, but get rid of all the other ones for this website. Because what we're doing at this point in time in V2, we have a new version of our index HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. We want to get rid of the old one because we don't accidentally want to match that. Because what would happen in that case is you're like, oh, I keep on updating the cache, but I still get the first version of our website. And that's because you haven't cleaned up your caches. So fun times. That's one way that service workers, you can kind of shoot yourself in the foot with them. And then, of course, one of the main things that service workers are used for is anytime you do a network request. The main UI thread will fire an event over to the service worker to do the fetch. And in this case, what we're doing is we're taking a look to see if the URL that's being fetched exists in our cache. If it does, respond with the one in local cache. If not, go off to the network for it. And that is pretty much the main kind of example for service workers. And a lot of times they're just kind of being used as a proxy between the browser and the web itself. Although there is a lot of other fun things you can do with them. So that was all boilerplate code, and I would not recommend that you write your own. I would recommend that you use this tool. It's called Workbox from Google. It'll ask you a bunch of questions, and it'll kind of query you on how your application is actually set up. And that way, it'll keep you from introducing the same bugs that I just talked about, like shooting yourself in the foot because you forgot to delete your old caches. And the nice thing about Workbox is it has plugins for Webpack, Gulp, and NPM, so you can integrate it into your build step already. One of the fun things about Workbox is when you get into service workers, there's lots of strategies. You can go cache first, then network, or network first, then cache. And then when you start writing those in the fetch handler, you get a lot of code, and it's a lot of if statements, and it looks really ugly. Workbox will help you make that a lot simpler to understand. It's basically using node-style routing in order to figure out how these things should be loaded. For instance, if you always want to go to the cache for any of the images on your site, you can write a regular expression to load anytime the regular expression is matched, it'll go to the cache and look for those things first before it goes off to the network. Anyway, I know I just said regular expression, so now we have two problems, but what are you going to do? Another great tool from Google is called Lighthouse. It will allow you to basically do an audit of your application and see how well it performs. And in this case, the first time I ran it, it did not perform very well. So it gives you a nice report that you can go through, and it'll tell you a lot of things that you can fix, and most of them are fairly simple. And after spending a couple of minutes with this, we're matching up to progressive web apps a lot better, and the performance is better as well. So it's a really, really great tool to use. All right. So all of those things work really well in Chrome. They work really well in Firefox, and Edge is coming along great, and Microsoft is really supporting it well. But I guess we need to address the elephant in the room. I haven't really talked about Apple at all. So yeah. They didn't have really great support for progressive web apps. And it's only been recently with iOS 11, and specifically with iOS 11.3, which just recently dropped, that they've added some support for the web app manifest and some support for service workers. So let's take a look at some things that we can do. First and foremost, if you're using anything before 11.3, what you would need to do in order to support the short name is add this meta tag into your index.html to let the user be able to have that name set. If you don't add this meta tag in, it's going to go off to the title tag of your web page. And your title tag may be 20, 40 characters long, depending on what gets tossed in there. And you can imagine what that looks on your home screen. It gets truncated. It's not that great. However, this is supported in iOS 11.3. This is one of the web app manifest portions that is supported. As well, if you're trying to get that kind of standalone display, what you would do previous to 11.3 is to set the web app capable to yes. So that's a good thing. You can support that in earlier versions of iOS. But as of 11.3, standalone is supported. Apple does not support browser minimal UI and full screen yet, but hopefully in 12 it will, and we'll see. As well, the theme color, Apple doesn't give you a lot of options. You can do black, black translucent, or translucent, and that will just basically color the status bar for you, but that's as much as you can do. It's not supported in 11.3. And then, of course, images. So here's a great thing. If you're previous to 11.3, you need to add this link into it, because if you do not provide an icon for the add to home screen functionality on Apple, what it will do is take a screenshot of your application, shrink it down, and then put it on the desktop. So you can imagine how useful that is to your users. And they're like, what the hell is this thing? However, that is still needed in 11.3. So you want to make sure you have the link to these icons. And it's the same thing with the splash page. There is no, it doesn't automatically create the splash page for you, so you want to provide an icon in there, or sorry, an image in there for the splash screen as well. So once we do all of that stuff, things are kind of looking a little bit better when it comes to Apple. So that's great. However, there's some problems. So as of iOS 11, as we're, I think, working on some of this progressive web app stuff in the background, they have broken a lot of stuff. So it will break the file input tag. It will break camera. It will break get user media. So what you need to do in order to have those things working on an add to home screen type application in Apple is remove the web app capable. So we're in a really weird situation right now, where if you have iOS 10, you add web app capable. If you're in iOS 11, then you want to remove it, because it breaks a lot of functionality. In 11.3, that's where you want to take advantage of progressive web apps. So the nice thing about Apple is that users tend to update their systems pretty quickly. I think we get up to about 80% users upgrading to the latest OS within like 2 weeks of it dropping. So it's not like Android, where I was talking to one of my friends earlier who's still supporting Android 2. I feel for him so badly. All right, and what about service workers? Well, a few months ago, service workers were one of these things that was on Apple's 5-year plan, but now, hey, they're supported. That is fantastic news, isn't it? So we're just like, we're so excited, because like finally we'll be able to use all these capabilities on an iOS application as well. Yeah, there's some bugs. For instance, on Chrome, on Firefox, when you persist your application, it's going to stay there unless there's like intense memory pressures on your device, and then the operating system may remove these old caches. Apple's like, yeah, we'll keep it around for a couple of weeks, but then we just might delete it out from underneath you. So that's not the greatest. So when it comes to like caching this stuff, you kind of expect it to be there. And so the next time the user starts up your application, they won't be loading things from cache. They'll have to go to the network. You're not getting the benefit that way. As well, you've got this really weird behavior. Anytime you leave the progressive web app and you come back into it, it completely restarts the activity. So if you're like 3 layers deep in your app and you like switch over to Twitter to send a tweet and then come back, you're starting from scratch again. So you can imagine what that does, just kind of like an OAuth kind of setup where you have to go to another application. Not great. Great, and so some other missing features include things like push notifications. The web push API is not supported on Safari. They have their own push notification system that they have set up. Hopefully they'll be updating that. Background sync, which is something that we really didn't talk about today, but is this fantastic thing that service workers can do. It basically allows you to say like, hey, I want you to send this off to the network when it's available. So if you like start making some sort of like hotel reservation, and then you get on the F train and you're underneath the ground and you have no connectivity whatsoever, even when you hit save on that, the app can save it for you and wait until it detects that you're back online and send that to the system that's going to do the booking for you. Background sync, fantastic technology. It can do no background code execution. So if your progressive web app on iOS is not in the foreground, it cannot run any code for you, which kind of sucks, etc., etc., etc. So that's kind of embarrassing. I hope that as of iOS 12, which will be dropping later this year, that they will fix a lot of these bugs. But at least what we see is movement towards supporting progressive web apps. So you may be asking yourself, like, well, why would I do this then if iOS doesn't fully support things? And smarter man than me said this. That's Tom Dale, the creator of Ember. He said, always bet on the web. So that's what I like to do. And it's got me this far, 20 years gainfully employed. I love that. So does my mortgage. But basically, these things are coming, and you can start to take advantage of them right now. So they're supported on Android. They're supported in a lot of the major browsers. We see that Apple is moving towards it. So if you're betting on this technology now, you're only going to reap the benefits of it later once all the operating systems are supporting it. So, man, I almost got it in 30 minutes. That's it for me. Thank you so much. When I tweet out the slides, a lot of the background information that I pulled from is linked to it here. So feel free to hit me up with any other questions.